While the newly elected Mr. President of America pursues his shifting policies with dictator Putin, Russian occupation forces continue to invade sovereign Ukrainian soil. Ukrainian defenders continue to brutally destroy the Russian occupiers, who are crawling like zombies under Ukrainian shells in search of profit. In this video, I will show real, intense battles from the past month. I'm Hustler. Let's get started. This is archival footage that I decided to add. It was filmed in the first month of the full-scale war. This Russian Mi-24 aircraft was flying to bomb Kiev, but was shot down with a javelin. 2 days ago marked 3 years since the beginning of the war, but Ukrainians are still fighting. Russian assault on the Kupiansk direction. A column of armored vehicles with Russian infantry was heading to attack Ukrainian positions, but Ukrainian drone pilots intercepted their movement and began shelling them. A kamikaze drone hits the target. The tank explodes and then catches fire. Other armored vehicles were also attacked by drone pilots. In total, 3 armored personnel carriers and 1 tank were destroyed. The assault was successfully repelled. This is Donetsk region, near the villages of Memrik and Vishneva. The Russians, in their attempts to capture Ukrainian villages, were brutally crushed by Ukrainian drones. The Russians often use civilian pickup trucks to storm Ukrainian positions, but their big mistake is that they are completely defenseless against kamikaze drones. Here is a UAZ-469 vehicle. They began to be produced in 1964, and now Russians are actively using them on the battlefield. The Russians keep trying to capture the Donetsk region, but each time they face strong resistance from the drone pilots of the Magyar Birds Brigade, and hear that a reconnaissance drone detects an ambush of an enemy tank firing at Ukrainian positions. Kamikaze drone pilots are on the way and ready to strike back. The drone pilot delivers a precise strike, and the tank first catches fire and then explodes. Before its final destruction, it manages to fire one last shot. In slow motion, it looks very impressive. It is clear that the tank was fully loaded with ammunition. But this is not the end. A Russian soldier jumps out of the tank and starts running toward the tree line, simultaneously removing his burning gear. He is extremely hot, despite the fact that it is quite a cold time of year. Here he is running in a purely Soviet uniform, trying to hide in a tree line. But even there, it's not so easy. Ukrainian sappers had previously mined the area. And this is what the tank looks like now, nothing but worthless, scorching scrap metal. And here is another Russian tank with a trawl in front of it, clearing mines dropped remotely from drones. Here we can see that the first mine explodes under the trawl and the other under the tank. After the explosion, the tank stops, and the pilots of the kamikaze drones are already preparing for a combat mission. From the reconnaissance drone, it is visible that the tank is equipped with electronic warfare systems, but the pilots of Magyar's birds know how to bypass them. The drone pilot strikes, but the tank's armor holds. Another attempt is needed. Another kamikaze drone hits the target, leading to the tank's complete destruction. We can clearly see the fire engulfing the tank, consuming it entirely. Even the additional protection of the turtle tank did not save it from complete destruction. And here is a Russian artillery gun. All it takes is a hole in the barrel, and it will no longer be able to fire. Even if the Russians try to shoot with it, it will simply explode into pieces. This is exactly what Ukrainian kamikaze drone operators are working on. After the drone hits the gun, another drone always comes to make sure the shot was successful. Another Russian artillery gun. This one is better camouflaged, but it was still detected. After the strike, another drone is used to confirm the presence of a hole. Here, we can see a nice crack. And one more artillery gun that needs to be neutralized. And here is a Russian truck. At night, it exploded on a remotely placed mine and now stands abandoned. Russian soldiers are somewhere nearby, in the wood. As we can see, it was towing an artillery gun. Now the task of Ukrainian drone pilots is to neutralize the target. The first hit had no effect, so a second strike is needed. Another drone pilot took aim and hit the truck's cargo bed, which was fully loaded with ammunition. As a result, the truck exploded. Below, we see destroyed Russian armored vehicles on the road of death. And this is all that was left after the Russian truck. Here's another Russian combat vehicle that was hit by a mine and is now abandoned. It needs to be destroyed so that the Russians cannot tow it away and repair it. The hit is clearly visible. Later, intelligence confirmed that the combat vehicle was destroyed and burned. Another target for Ukrainian pilots. Russians in a pickup truck are changing their location, but a drone pilot spotted them and started pursuit. One of the Russians tried to shoot down the drone with a rifle, but his attempt was unsuccessful. And here's a Russian Bukhanka carrying ammunition. It was also attacked by a Ukrainian kamikaze drone. A powerful explosion is visible, but that's not the end of it. Here it burns intensely, and then Russian munitions detonate. Another Russian tank was stopped by a mine. Here it is, parked, heavily armored with additional protection. There is active protection on top, but it did not save it. The drone operator makes a targeted strike, but the first hit does not penetrate the armor. So another kamikaze drone takes off and strikes the tank. Now this tank will definitely not be able to drive. The tank is now completely engulfed in flames and ready to explode. The detonation was successful. Another truck with ammunition and an artillery gun, a complete gentleman's set. A kamikaze drone pilot takes off and hits the target. The truck slowly catches fire. It's necessary to wait for the flames to do their work and burn it completely. Here, the fire is slowly doing its work. This is a Russian armored personnel carrier full of infantry heading for an assault. The drone operator takes aim and strikes. The armored carrier slows down but still reaches the drop-off point for the infantry. The Russian infantry disembarks and takes positions in the forest. Later, the night doctor will pay them a visit. For now, the drone pilot is about to destroy this armored personnel carrier. It hits, and the armored personnel carrier is destroyed. Here, reconnaissance shows that the armored personnel carrier is on fire. It had an electronic warfare system on the roof, but it couldn't protect it from the drone strike. Another tank has been caught on the same route where Russian armored personnel carriers were previously destroyed, as you may have seen in earlier videos. For those who missed it, here's a quick recap. This brand new armored personnel carrier also hit a mine and was abandoned by the Russians. The kamikaze drone operator is already in a hurry to destroy it. The first hit was ineffective, so another drone is sent for the final destruction. Another Russian armored personnel carrier is transporting infantry for an assault, but it's intercepted by Ukrainian drone operators, who begin their attack. The armored personnel carrier activated smoke screens and its electronic warfare systems, but it was all for nothing. Another kamikaze drone flies to finally destroy the target. The assault was successfully repelled, the enemy equipment is destroyed, and now the night doctor will be searching for the Russian infantry. Districts of the village Zolotarivka, Luhansk region. 2 Russian armored personnel carriers with infantry advanced toward Ukrainian positions for an offensive operation. One of the armored personnel carriers hit a mine. It is clearly visible how the rags and pieces of metal from the armored personnel carrier were blown apart, and the Russian infantry had to disembark in an emergency and look for an ambush site. The Russian infantry are running toward the tree line, trying to take cover before the arrival of Ukrainian kamikaze drones. The other armored personnel carrier continued to move, but Ukrainian kamikaze drone pilots had already taken off after it. After being hit by a kamikaze drone, the Russian armored personnel carrier stops and decides to turn around and move in the other direction. Other Ukrainian kamikaze drones are already approaching and ready to strike. While the Russian infantry, who had disembarked from the first destroyed armored personnel carrier, were searching for an ambush position, Ukrainian kamikaze drone operators also targeted them. The Russian occupiers tried to hide between trees, in trenches and dugouts, but they were constantly watched by a reconnaissance drone. Kamikaze drone pilots also continued to do their job and locate Russian infantrymen. Here, Russian soldiers managed to shoot down a drone with an assault rifle. A reconnaissance drone spotted 3 other Russian soldiers hiding in a trench. The Russians sitting in the trench are in no hurry to provide first aid to their comrade. Instead, they continue reloading their rifle magazines. No other Russian soldiers are visible. These Russian soldiers are not trying to change their location, even though they know that Ukrainian pilots know where they are hiding. And here is a personalized Russian T-80 Rodnoy tank. Ukrainian pilots of kamikaze drones began attacking it to destroy it. After 2 hits, the tank begins to smoke, then catches fire and burns down. The Russian offensive failed, the attempted attack was repelled. Another assault, but this time in the Kursk region. The Russians, using tanks and armored personnel carriers, attempted to break through to Ukrainian positions. In response, Ukrainian kamikaze drone operators and artillery forces launched an attack on the Russian vehicle column. During the assault, the Russians began to abandon their armored vehicles and fled to the forest to hide from the kamikaze drones. This tank and armored personnel carrier managed to break through the shelling, but not for long. Kamikaze drones and artillery continued to strike them. This is where the artillery hits an armored personnel carrier and a tank, and they start to stop. When the tank came to a complete stop, the kamikaze drone pilots continued to strike. Some tanks had already been neutralized, but there were still some that continued to move. Therefore, the Ukrainian military continued to attack the enemy equipment. Ukrainian troops successfully repel Russian offensive. Here is the Russian offensive in the Kharkiv region with 2 armored personnel carriers and 1 tank. One armored personnel carrier was disabled by a shot from a handheld anti-tank grenade launcher. Another armored personnel carrier continued its movement. The hit armored personnel carrier stalled and began to disembark infantry. A Ukrainian kamikaze drone flew to the same location to finally destroy the hit armored personnel carrier. The second armored personnel carrier also began to disembark infantry and then immediately began to retreat. A kamikaze drone caught up with it and hit it. After the second hit, the armored personnel carrier lost control and was abandoned by the Russian military. Then the bomber drones arrived and started clearing the tree line. Donetsk region, outskirts of the village of Vodiano Druhe, a Russian column of tanks and armored personnel carriers is advancing to capture a Ukrainian village. Their attempted assault is intercepted by Ukrainian kamikaze drone pilots. Approaching the enemy armored vehicles, the drone operators began precisely attacking the Russian column. With precise strikes, the Russians began losing armored personnel carriers one by one. And this is another Russian assault on the Ukrainian village of Velika Novosilka, also in the Donetsk region. The Russians deployed a large amount of heavy armored vehicles and tanks. With 2 convoys of armored vehicles, they attempted to bring in Russian infantry and secure positions. Ukrainian artillery forces opened fire. After entering the village, the Russians also opened fire and began shelling the area with machine guns and tanks. Here, a column of Russian vehicles is arriving at the infantry landing site. They are being attacked by Ukrainian Grad multiple launch rocket systems. Some armored personnel carriers are successfully damaged. During the landing of the troops, the Russians also opened fire and shelled buildings. Now we can see one Russian column of armored vehicles that landed the troops returning back, and another with infantry is heading back to land infantry to take up positions in the village. In this assault, the Russians lost a lot of vehicles and personnel, but managed to gain a foothold in the village. However, Ukrainian artillery and drone operators continue to attack the occupiers who are hiding in the ruins of a Ukrainian village. Here, Russian infantry are looking for a place to take cover from Ukrainian kamikaze drones. But a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone is constantly watching them and knows where they are hiding. Here, a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone spots a Russian occupier who is hiding in a building. Only his teeth and eyes, watching the drone, are visible. Here, a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone spotted the movement of a Russian modernized military vehicle, the Bukhanka. When the Bukhanka stopped, the kamikaze drone operator seized the moment and struck. Here, Ukrainian kamikaze drone operators discovered abandoned Russian MTLBs and armored personnel carriers and immediately began destroying them. And here is a rather amusing video. The Russians stole a mini tractor from Ukrainian civilians and are trying to move around and transport ammunition on it, but it lacks power, so the Russians still have to push it awkwardly. That's all for today, friends. Subscribe to the channel to not miss new videos. This material was prepared by Hustler. See you soon.